Representative Gary Click. Thank you so much for coming on Message from the House.
It's an honor to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
I am excited to talk about a couple pieces of legislation that you are working on, and I want to first ask about you as a lawmaker, your district, kind of set the scene for folks.
Well, it's a rural district, Northwest Ohio. It's the 88th district, and that's Seneca and Sandusky counties. Just a bunch of great people all the way around, and I'm honored and privileged to represent them.
I went to school in Findlay, so I spent a lot of time in Northwest
Not
Ohio.
too far away. Yeah. You were almost right there in God's country. You were a suburb of God's country.
I will be sure to let them know that they just missed the mark of God's country. Speaking of which, you are very religious. You're a pastor.
I am. Yeah.
Wonderful. Is it a local?
I have actually transitioned to pastor emeritus back in the spring, but I have pastored this church for 19 years, and I've been in the gospel ministry for 35 years in various aspects as a youth pastor, and done some chaplaincy. I've been a law enforcement chaplain. I've been a hospice chaplain, and just really all my life just working to reach out and to help people one way or another.
That is absolutely incredible. I want to first start out with a bill that will definitely help people. Yeah. It recently passed the House of Representatives. It is the My Child, My Chart Act. Kind of talk me through, I would say first, the inspiration for this bill.
If there's ever been a grassroots piece of legislation, this is it. It wasn't a lobbyist. It wasn't any group that came to me. It was just in conversations where, in fact, we were just at a local diner right here in Columbus, and someone found out I was a legislator. The waitress did. She put her hands on her hips, and she said, "Did you know that I don't have access to my child's My Chart?" I said, "You're kidding me." And so we began to talk about that. And then randomly, someone else would tell me, "Guess what? I don't have access to my child's My Chart." Really? A lady in my church worked as the secretary, a teacher in the school, and she was preparing for her daughter's surgery the next day. She had a sports injury in her ankle. And all at once they had to do some kind of a video conference the day before, and she went to sign in, and she couldn't sign in without her daughter, and her daughter was in class. And so fortunately, she was right there at the school, and she went and grabbed her daughter, snatched her out of class, and got hurt because she had to give her mom permission to get her registered on the video chat for her surgery the next day. Someone else said, "Hey, you know what?" They were complaining about this on social media after we'd already introduced the bill because we'd heard from so many other random people about this. And she said, "I got turned over to a collection agency because I did not even know that I had a bill." She said, "I pay all my bills. But because I had lost access to my child's My Chart, and I didn't even know that I didn't have access." And that was a large part of the problem is people didn't know what they didn't know. And so now she's being turned over to a collection agency because she didn't even know that she had a bill because she didn't have access to her child's My Chart.
I want to ask, with this bill now passed by the House, what does it work to do exactly?
Great. So we really had to thread the needle because some of this is related to HIPAA, which we have no control over.
Yeah.
And so to thread that needle, what we said is that our healthcare providers, the primary care providers, we made sure that we clarified that through the amendments, that they have to certify to the parents on an annual basis that there are 8 things that your child can do without your consent. Ohio law says there's 8 things that your child can do. They do not need parental consent for those things. And so according to HIPAA, if the parents don't have to consent, then they don't have the right to know. And so now you can go in and get your records, hard copies of your records in the office, but then the medical records companies and the providers began to get nervous thinking, we're going to accidentally give the parents something that they shouldn't have. And so they started cutting off access around the age of 12 years old, not by law, not by regulation, just their own decisions to do that. And they were not notifying the parents of this. So what My Child, My Chart does is it says that they must certify to the parents every year, these are the things that your child can do without your consent. Parents have a right to know that. Mm-hmm. And then it says, these things will not appear, you will not be able to see these things or have access to their medical records unless they consent. And then that child can, mom and dad and family can have a little conversation. The child can sign off and the parent has access to their child's medical records online as well. And so we just create that avenue. We don't change the things that they can or cannot do. But we simply, that's a broader focus than what we were really targeting with this. Right now, we just wanted to make sure that parents were informed, because the big problem was they didn't know what they didn't know. And now they know what they can know or cannot know and how to correct that.
What kind of feedback have you gotten from this bill as it's moved?
It's been very positive, to be honest with you. You know, one of the things that we were attempting to do was to ask the providers to divide the records and say, okay, even if they can't see this, they can still be able to see this. And we got a lot of kickback saying, oh, it's too difficult, we can't do that, or it's going to cost too much money. In this day and age, I'm not sure that's legitimate, but there was enough pushback, and we were able to get people to buy in if we removed that. So we removed that aspect of it. And in all reality, that just means, okay, now it's just more likely that parents and their children are going to sign this and they'll have total access to their records. And we got a lot of positive feedback from both sides of the aisle. You know, this passed 87-6. There were only 6 no votes. And if I can be honest with you, some of them called me later and said, you know, if I'd have really understood, I'd actually voted yes.
Wow. Well, we'll count only 6 no votes then,
Yeah,
right?
that's a good day any day.
Right, for sure. That's incredible, truly, for how many members? 99?
Yeah.
Close? Yeah. So that is amazing. We will continue to watch that as it goes through the process. I want to switch over to House Bill 486, the Charlie Kirk American Heritage Act.
Yeah.
Talk me through, I'll first ask, before the inspiration, what this bill does, and then we'll talk more about the namesake.
So this bill is really very simple in one sense, but it's generating a lot of heat. And it does not really create any new laws. It just affirms the law as it exists. And it simply says this: it is not a violation of the First Amendment. It is not a violation of the principles of the separation of church and state to teach the historical facts regarding the influence of religion on American history. And included in that is Christianity, because there's no religion that played a larger role than Christianity in the shaping of our nation. Now, we are a nation that practices and believes in the freedom of religion. So you have the freedom to worship however you choose. You don't have to be a Christian. No one wants to make you be a Christian. But it is Christianity that actually created that freedom of religion here in the United States of America. And so we want teachers to be able to be free to teach that. But many of them are afraid. And they're afraid because they get intimidated by others. And if you bring up anything to do with Christianity, they want to say separation of church and state. Most people don't even understand that concept. They don't understand the history of it. And we want at least the history of that to even be taught, because that actually started within the church.
Yeah.
It did not start within secularism. It didn't start with humanism. It didn't start with the Enlightenment or with the deists, as people like to say. It actually started within the church.
Wow. That's very interesting.
Yeah.
You would think it would have started with religion or something outside of the church to say separation of that entity to another. But
well, what happened is actually you go back to 1635 in that era, and Roger Williams, who was a Baptist preacher, and he had some of his own ideas that were not readily accepted in Massachusetts. And he already fled England because he was going to be imprisoned in England, and now he's in Massachusetts. He actually spent a little bit of time with the Pilgrims, who, by the way, was a church that came over and planted a church in the United States. It wasn't the United States at the time, but in the New World. And they argued about a lot of things. And one of the things, laughably, that they argued about was, do you pray before or after the meal? Now,
there you go.
that wasn't the one that caused the big stir. But they were going to ship him back to England. They were going to extradite him. And he found out he was sick, and it was the middle of winter, and there was a big storm. And he escaped in knee-deep snow with the help of the Native Americans, fled north to Providence, started Providence, Rhode Island, based on religious liberty. And then he wrote this thing called The Bloody Tenet of Persecution. And in that, he actually went to Isaiah chapter 5, where the Bible talks about a vineyard and the wild grapes and a hedge that separated them, and that hedge was the wall. He interpreted it to be the wall of separation between church and state. And he says you have to keep that wall up, because what was happening is the government, people want to blame religion, but it was the government that was taking over religion and imposing a religion on others. Then John Locke picked up on that theme from Roger Williams, and then so did Elder John Leland, a very influential pastor in the founding era. And John Leland was an anti-federalist, and he was opposed to the Constitution. And today we look and say, how could anyone oppose the Constitution? But he was anti-federalist. Patrick Henry was anti-federalist. Edmund Randolph, the governor of Virginia, was anti-federalist. George Mason was anti-federalist. All these people were anti-federalist, but the primary reason is because there was no Bill of Rights. And they said, without a Bill of Rights, we cannot support this. There were actually a group of about 500 Baptists under Lewis Craig, a Baptist preacher, and he'd been put in jail for preaching the gospel without a license. Patrick Henry actually came and defended him and four other pastors who were imprisoned only for preaching without a license. And that group of pastors, there's a small little book called The Traveling Church. They left Virginia, Spotsylvania, Virginia, and traveled to Gilbert's Creek, Kentucky, and started there, which is why there's a lot of Baptists in Kentucky.
Okay.
Because they took Daniel Boone's Wilderness Trail to flee persecution. And so John Leland saw this, and he said, we can't support this Constitution without a Bill of Rights. And so James Madison actually came and lobbied him for his support because Madison was not going to be elected to the ratifying committee. And he's the father of the Constitution. Yeah. So without the father of the Constitution there to shepherd it through the ratifying process, it probably would not have been ratified. And Madison told him, we have to have a Bill of, not Madison, but Leland told Madison, we have to have a Bill of Rights. Without that, I can't support it. Madison promised him that he would advocate for a Bill of Rights, which he did not agree with before. And so Leland endorsed him, which people say pastors aren't supposed to endorse. But without this pastor's endorsement, Madison would have never been elected and would have never shepherded the Constitution through. So without a Baptist pastor advocating for separation of church and state, we would not even have our Constitution. Wow. Madison followed up. And then in the Bill of Rights, the First Amendment, Congress shall make no laws respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. And when you look at the top signature on that, it's Frederick Augustus Muhlenberg. He was the very first Speaker of the House. And guess what else he was? A pastor.
Yeah, I was going to say, was he Baptist? Baptist pastor?
No, he was a Lutheran pastor.
Lutheran pastor.
Yes. I'm a Baptist, but we weren't the only ones fighting for that cause.
Yeah, no, that's amazing.
There were people of all different faiths and religions, primarily the Christian religions, though. Mm-hmm. But even Leland said, speaking of Muslims, he said, listen, if they're honest and if they love their country, they deserve to be elected to office just as much as anyone else does. Yeah. And that is part of the liberty that comes from Christianity, because true Christianity does not believe that religion can be forced on anyone. It is a matter of the heart. Government cannot impose a faith on you. So this whole concept of separation of church and state came from within the church. It came from Christian people who are advocating for religious liberty, not just for themselves, but for all.
If that was not a pitch of why schools should be able to ingrain religion into history, right? I don't know what was. That was very well put.
Thank you. And some people are like, you want them to actually, I've seen some emails. You want them to preach Christian? No, we don't want you to preach. Yeah. We don't want you to proselytize. I've actually had people say, we need to get the Bible back in public schools. And I say, no, we don't. That's not the job of the schools. That's the job of the church. I don't want random people in school teaching theology because, quite honestly, their theology might not be the same as mine or yours or someone else's. That's not the job of the state or of the government. That's the job of the church. But to teach how Christianity shaped our culture, how Christianity shaped our Declaration of Independence, how Christianity shaped our Constitution, which, by the way, in the Constitution, why in the Constitution does it say that the president has 10 days to sign a bill, excepting Sundays? Why Sundays? Why not Saturdays? Why not Fridays? Why not Mondays? I think it's obvious.
Yeah. It's the holy day for those who don't know if it's obvious.
You think any of those are listening?
Right. Hopefully it's educational.
And it's also dated in the year of our Lord.
Yeah.
1787. Wow. It's like the year of our. Well, how many lords do you know born in 1787 years before the Constitution?
Wow.
Only one. People say the Constitution is secular. It is civic. I draw a distinction, and sometimes people blend those words between secular And civic, secular means godless. It is not godless, but it's not an instrument of religion, but it is civic. And even if you look at the Bible teaches separation of church and state.
Yeah.
You look at the 10 Commandments, there's 2 tables of the law. The first table is man's duties towards God. The second table is man's duties towards man. Jesus said you can sum up the 10 Commandments in this way. He said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. That's the first. The second part is to love your neighbor as yourself. And when the Apostle Paul talks in Romans 13 about civic government, it's his elevator speech on civil government.
Yeah.
He starts quoting the commandments, but he only quotes the second table of the law, not the first table of the law, because only the second table of the law falls under man's jurisdiction.
Interesting. I didn't know that either. Thank you for breaking that down. As a studier of the 10 Commandments myself, I went to a Catholic school, so I learned all about those.
Really?
I did. And I want to ask, this is a pretty...
So recite all 10 of them for me. Just
I know.
teasing. Just teasing.
I know. And what were they?
I don't know if I could do that on the
Fruits of
spot.
Goodwill? Yeah. I don't know. I remember we had to name these different fruits that meant different...
Oh, the fruit of the Spirit?
Yeah, things like that.
Things like that.
It's been unfortunately a while since my last time in a Catholic school. Catholic Church doesn't always give you a refresher each Sunday on all 10 commandments.
So what you're saying is you need some remediation.
Yes, potentially. Somebody get a textbook out for Olivia. I do not want to brush over a very important part of this bill, is that it is named in honor of Charlie Kirk.
Yes.
I guess talk me through the impact that horrific incident has had on you as a person and lawmaker, and why you decided to name this bill after him.
So I've been frustrated with this thing because the lack of teaching, and not just the lack of teaching, but the intimidation of our educators. You know, I've had teachers tell me I can't teach this because I'll get sued, I'll get in trouble, and I even had a superintendent tell me it's illegal to teach those things because of separation of church and state, and that's not true. Even the ACLU, by the way, said you're already allowed to do this, and I'm going to hold them to that.
Yeah.
But that frustration kind of boiled over when Charlie Kirk was assassinated. You know, I was on my way home from Columbus, and my aide, Janae, reached out, and she said, Charlie Kirk's been shot. It doesn't look good. And that just was a gut punch because he's emblematic of who many of us are. And Charlie, he was not afraid to talk about his politics or his faith. You know, his pastor, Rob McCoy, made this statement. He said, the streams of liberty flow from the cross. And which goes back to what I was saying, is this is why we have our freedoms, because of those Christian teachings and doctrines. And Charlie, he was asked, he said, what do you want to be remembered for? And he said this, he said, I want to be remembered not for being a Donald Trump supporter, although I'm sure he's okay with that, not for being a Republican, not for being a conservative, but he said for my courage and my faith. And he often taught people, this is where our heritage comes from. This is why we have our freedoms. This is why America is great. And so I sense that there's a lot of hatred. I experienced a lot of hatred. I'm a big boy. I can handle it. You know, I don't go home and cry at night. But I get attacked very often just for being a Christian, just for being a pastor in the legislature, just follow my social media sometimes. It all rolls off my back. But the reality is that is the kind of hate because people are uneducated on where their freedoms come from. That's the kind of hate that boiled over into that assassination of Charlie Kirk. And I thought, how can I honor Charlie Kirk's memory other than to be fighting for the liberty that teachers have to teach the truth about America's heritage. And so we named this bill in honor of Charlie Kirk, and I think it's going to honor him. I don't want to be too presumptive, but I think this bill has a great chance, and I think it will honor him, and it will enlighten the next generation. It's not going to proselytize. You don't have to be a Christian to understand the Christian history. You can be of some other faith. In fact, I talked to a Muslim friend of mine. He said, we need more Christians getting involved and getting engaged. And that was from a Muslim friend of mine. So I just think we need to know our history, and I think it would honor Charlie's memory for our students to understand where their liberties come from.
And I saw that Representative Davila is on this bill
Yes.
with you. What has it been like, working with him, drafting this legislation, and what other feedback have you gotten from your colleagues on it?
Well, Representative Davila, I have so much respect for him. And when I sent out my co-sponsor request and he said, "Can I be on this bill with you?" I was just completely honored. And he brings a great academic background, a great background of service in our military, and he's very respected in our caucus. And so, I jumped at that chance to have him join me on this bill. And my colleagues here in the State House, just a lot of positive impact on them and from them. We all want to do something that's meaningful. We all believe this is meaningful, and throughout the community, just tons and tons and tons of support. We have the naysayers out there, and that's fine. Everybody should say what they want to say, but I think that the heart of Ohio is to tell the truth. That's all we're asking for our history teachers to be free to do, and we're not even there are no mandates. We're not saying you must teach this. Add this into your curriculum. You've got to do this. No, we're just saying you're free to teach this. We're just removing the invisible shackles that are on the hands of our teachers who understand the truth, who know the truth and want to teach the truth, but they have been intimidated and they are fearful for their careers, for their vocations, if they teach the truth. And we're saying, no, you can teach the truth. It's not up to you to proselytize. It's not up to you to recruit. Just tell the history. And that's what America is all about.
Well, we will definitely be keeping an eye on that bill, hopefully as it moves through the legislature, a very important one. Yes. Representative Gary Click, thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Olivia, for having me. It's been a joy to be in the studio today.
Yes, I love hearing about your different passion projects. I feel like there are so many pieces of legislation that you work on, and you're very passionate about it. So I even got a nice little history lesson, so I appreciate it. I quickly want to go through our social media. You can follow us on the Ohio House GOP Caucus on Facebook, Ohio House_GOP on Instagram, and OHR GOP Caucus on Twitter. You can subscribe on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Representative Click, thank you again.
Thank you so much. God bless you.